4 spine-chilling true basement horror stories. Exposed. Discover the sinister secrets hidden below. Sarah felt like a ghost in her own life. The once vibrant home she shared with her 2 young kids was now crumbling and faded. Mold crawling up the damp walls, the scent of rot heavy in the air. She spent her days working long shifts at the local diner, pouring cups of coffee and pretending everything was fine. Yet every night, after her children were finally asleep, the stillness crept into the corners of her mind, filling her with unease. She often found solace in the quiet darkness, but that peace was about to shatter. It started as a soft whisper, a murmur barely above a sigh, echoing from the basement. Beneath the creaking of the floorboards, it became an unsettling scratching, as if someone was trying to claw their way out. She shrugged it off at first. Fatigue, she told herself, just her imagination playing tricks in the night. But as the days went on, the noises grew louder, the whispers turning urgent. They seemed alive, wrapped in something sinister that gnawed at her sanity. She tried to remain strong for her kids, who played innocently upstairs, blissfully unaware of the creepy presence lurking below. Yet tension curled in her gut as shadows flickered at the edges of her vision, flashes of movement teasing her from the corner of her eye. The air thickened with dread. Something wasn't right. Her thoughts drifted to Mr. Jenkins, the neighbor with the friendly smile, always offering help with a rake or the occasional pat on the back. He had been increasingly odd lately, often lurking in his yard, watching her with an intensity that felt unsettling. He'd been the neighborhood's definition of charm. Now something darker loomed beneath his surface. One night, driven by a mix of curiosity and fear, she stood in her basement by the old, rotting stairs, the air so thick with whispers it felt suffocating. Her eye caught a loose floorboard. Heart pounding, she pried it open, revealing a hidden door that descended deeper into darkness, into Mr. Jenkins' territory. The realization clawed at her insides. The man she once trusted now shrouded in secrecy. Before we continue, I need to tell you something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to their system, and many people are missing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and select all notifications so you don't miss future videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Panic gripped her. Could Mr. Jenkins be responsible for the whispers? For the scratching sounds that haunted her nights? The pieces fell together like a haphazard puzzle, each terrifying revelation shoving her further into a nightmare. Shadows danced around her, swirling with malice as she dared to descend the rickety stairs into the abyss. Her pulse quickened. Would she find answers or danger? Then, clear as day, a child's voice echoed from below, faint but desperate, pleading for help. Sarah froze, terror paralyzing her limbs. The realization hit her like a cold fist. Was someone trapped down there? Her heart raced, the whispers growing louder, drowning her resolve in panic. In that suffocating darkness, she stood at the precipice of a decision. Could she face the horrors that lay beneath her very feet to protect her children? Or would that pursuit of truth lead her straight into the belly of danger? The choice hung heavy in the air, thick as the damp smell clinging to the crumbling walls. Steeling herself, Sarah clutched the edge of the opened floorboard. The child's voice called out again, softer this time, laced with palpable fear. "Help me, please." It tore at Sarah's heart, its urgency igniting her maternal instincts. She took a shaky step closer to the gaping darkness below. Fear and determination battled within her. One moment she stood paralyzed, lost in the horror of what might lie below. The next, her feet surged forward, driven by the insistent cries for help. The wooden stairs splintered beneath her weight. each creak echoing in the cavernous space, mingling with the whispers that swirled around her like a sinister embrace. She could swear she felt icy breath on the back of her neck. Her mind flashed to Mr. Jenkins, the way his gaze had lingered too long, the way the shadows wrapped themselves around him like a shroud. As she descended, the darkness enveloped her, thick and oppressive. She could barely make out the stone walls, slick and cold with moisture. The air turned foul, heavy with mold and something else, a metallic tang that pricked at her senses. She reached for the wall to steady herself, her fingers brushing against something damp and slimy. "Hello?" she called out, voice trembling, trying to keep the tremor at bay. "Is anyone down there?" Silence answered her, a vast, suffocating silence that rang louder than any scream. Heart racing, she pressed on, each step like a countdown to an impending doom. The murmur of whispers surged back, escalating into frantic hisses. Panic flared, urging her to retreat, but the child's pleas echoed in her mind. "Over here!" The voice broke through the suffocating silence, drawing her closer. She followed its direction, fumbling in the dampness for something, anything, that would guide her way. Her fingers grazed over cool metal, and she froze. Chains. A flicker of panic seized her. Was this a child's call for help or a trap set by something sinister? Shadows loomed larger in the dim light, warping shapes that darted in her periphery. The fear clawed at her throat, a visceral reminder that she was not alone. "Help me!" it pleaded again, cracked and forlorn. The plea tugged at her, an invisible tether pulling her forward. As she rounded a corner, her eyes zeroed in on a small figure ensnared in the darkness, pale and trembling. It was a boy, no older than her own children. He was dirty, tears streaking down his grimy cheeks, his hands bound by rusted chains. Relief flooded her, but a deep dread followed swiftly. How long had he been down here? Before she could draw breath to reassure him, a sound echoed behind her. A heavy footfall, deliberate and slow. Instinctively, Sarah spun around, heart pounding. The darkness behind her stirred, revealing a towering silhouette that blocked the faint light from above. "You're not supposed to be here!" Mr. Jenkins's voice dripped with venom, low and menacing. As her world shrank to a pinpoint of horror, Sarah felt the boy's grip tighten upon her sleeve, a silent cry for her to protect him. She glanced back at the frightened child, then at the dark figure approaching with predatory ease. In that moment, she understood. This was not just a basement, it was a prison, a twisted sanctuary for unspeakable things. The choice before her was no longer about the whispers. It was about survival against the very man she once trusted. The creeping dread transformed into adrenaline. "No!" she shouted, voice hoarse. "Get away from us!" But momentum slithered away like smoke. Mr. Jenkins inched closer, smile twisted, and shadows encasing him in a dark embrace. Sarah's heart raced as time froze. What would happen next? And that question hung in the air, thick with fear. Would she defy him, or would she surrender to the darkness closing in? Sarah's breath quickened, each inhale a desperate gasp, as she tried to push back the rising tide of panic. The boy beside her trembled, his eyes wide and glistening with unshed tears. He seemed terrified of the man advancing toward them, each step sowing dread into Sarah's heart. She locked eyes with Mr. Jenkins, studying the gleam of malice etched across his face, the way shadows danced around him as if alive. "You don't understand," Sarah urged, voice shaking but resolute. "He needs help. Just let him go." Her words hung in the fetid air, desperate and raw. The smile on Jenkins's face widened, revealing teeth that seemed out of place. "Help?" he echoed mockingly, as if the very notion were absurd. He took another deliberate step, the glimmer of something cold and threatening glinting in his hand. It was too dark to see clearly, but she could sense it was no good. "Why are you doing this?" Sarah demanded, her courage igniting despite the reality swirling around her. "He's just a child." "A child?" Jenkins laughed, a chilling sound that ricocheted off the damp stone walls. "You should see this place for what it truly is, a sanctuary for those who understand different things." As he spoke, Sarah could feel the shadows pressing in closer, the thick darkness almost suffocating. The boy's grip tightened again, and she turned to him, panicked. "What do you mean, sanctuary?" she managed to ask, voice barely above a whisper. "Mom said he takes kids. People who disappear," the boy stammered, words rushing out in a frantic hush. "I was looking for my friend and now..." The truth hit Sarah like a cold wave. He was right. There had been rumors going around town, whispers of children going missing, their laughter turned to echoes in the wind. Mr. Jenkins was at the center of it. The realization churned her stomach, but defiance stirred in her chest. "Let him go!" she screamed again, desperation fueling her fear. "Or what?" Jenkins taunted, an amused spark in his eyes. "You think you're in control here? You have no idea what lies in the darkness, do you?" His words slithered into her mind, wrapping around her thoughts like a noose. She glanced at the boy, whose face held a mixture of fear and determination. He looked at her as if she were his only hope. With a sudden burst of instinct, Sarah shifted herself in front of the boy, ready to face whatever terrifying fate awaited them. The chains that bound the boy seemed to glimmer in the faint light, and she had a crazy, reckless idea. "If you don't let him go, I swear I'll..." She fumbled for a threat, something to stop him, but the danger in his eyes made her voice falter. The shadows thickened, undulating and swirling, revealing faint outlines of unseen horrors lurking just beyond Jenkins's figure. "If you refuse me, things will get very messy," he growled, and even in the dim light she saw the promise of cruelty dance in his eyes. Every instinct screamed for Sarah to run, but the boy's tightening grip anchored her in place. The darkness behind Jenkins stirred ominously, pulsating with movement as if craving the light. Was this what he kept down here? Without thinking, Sarah lunged forward, aiming for Jenkins. If she could just buy them a moment, just a sliver of time, maybe they could escape. The boy gasped, surprise mixing with fear. But just as her hands reached for the man, shadows exploded into a frenzy, wrapping around her ankles, pulling her down. The boy's scream pierced the air, blending with her own cry as the darkness consumed her. "Welcome to my sanctuary." Jenkins's voice was the last thing she heard before everything dissolved into inky blackness. And in the depths of her fear, a chilling realization settled in her gut. She was trapped in a nightmare far worse than she had ever imagined. What lay ahead? What terror waited for her in the suffocating dark? The questions echoed endlessly as she wrestled with the growing shadows, and the unknown awaited just beyond reach. Sarah's senses screamed in protest as she felt herself being swallowed whole by the oppressive blackness. The cold tendrils of shadow snaked around her limbs, numbing her flesh with a clammy grip. Panic surged, wild and frantic, as she fought back, kicking and twisting in hopeless desperation. Yet the more she struggled, the tighter the shadows wound around her, as if they relished her terror. The boy's scream echoed in her mind, an eerie reminder of the innocents being crushed in this dark pit. The air was thick with the fetid stench of decay and despair, and despite that darkness, a glimmer of something hot and furious ignited in her heart. She had to fight for him, for herself. "Let us go!" she screamed into the void, her voice rough and raw. But there was no answer, just a suffocating silence that pressed in on all sides, heavy and thick like the stinging smoke of a dying fire. Her head spun, searching for a way out. Were there walls? A ceiling? Was she laying flat on the ground? She couldn't tell. As her mind raced, she thought of the boy. Where was he? She forced her eyes to adjust to the darkness, willing it to reveal anything, any sign of him. "Help!" she called out, but the word vanished into the nothingness. Suddenly, A flicker of light pierced the dark like a needle, drawing her eyes toward an indistinct shape. The shadows shuddered, and Jenkins emerged, gauzy tendrils swirling around him like a cloak of malicious intent, illuminated by the glow of a sickly green flame that he held in one hand. The light cast eerie shadows on his face, warping his features into a grotesque imitation of humanity. "Welcome to your new reality, Sarah," he cooed, a twisted grin stretching across his face. "You seem to think you have a choice here. You don't. Not anymore." She felt the bond of shadows around her weaken for a heartbeat, and without a second thought, Sarah wrenched herself free, pushing away from the hold. Just a few steps. She had to reach the boy. But her body was heavy, the darkness clinging to her like a second skin. Jenkins stepped closer, shadows swirling faster, forming claw-like appendages that reached for her. "Why fight what you cannot escape? Embrace the sanctuary!" His voice was thick with delight, and suddenly Sarah froze. A chilling realization clawed at her thoughts. There had been stories. The sanctuary. The way the town had whispered about it. About children whose laughter faded, faces forever locked in despair. The shadows were more than darkness. They were the remnants of those who had come here before her. Desperation surged anew as she forced herself to focus, her heart hammering painfully in her chest. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every lost child whose name would never be spoken again. "Go away!" she shouted, swinging her arms wildly as if she could drive him back with her sheer will. As the shadows writhed around him, something sparked. A resolve deep within her ignited. With a roaring scream, more a primal instinct than a conscious decision, she lunged at him, fueled by desperation. The shadows surged, trying to reclaim her, but adrenaline pushed her through. This was her chance to break free. In that moment of chaos, a soft whimper broke through the darkness. "Sarah!" Her heart squeezed painfully in her chest. The boy! He was close! "I'm here!" she cried. But as Sarah whipped around, the shadows twisted violently, pulling her back with an unrelenting force. Jenkins laughed, a sound thick with power, echoing in the suffocating void. "Welcome to my world, Sarah. You're just another guest now. The end is just the beginning." The light flickered again, and she saw him. The boy, terrified and chained, just beyond reach. Could she save him? Could they escape together? A surge of hope battled against the weight of despair as Sarah prepared for one desperate move. What would she sacrifice to pull them both out of this darkness? As she lunged again into the chaos, that crucial question hung in the air like a noose. Would it be enough to conquer the shadows, or would she become another lost echo inside Jenkins's sinister sanctuary? The shadows tightened as Sarah lunged forward, the darkness roaring around her like a living creature. Jenkins's laughter cut through the void, a sinister melody that danced around her like a taunt. The boy was so close, yet the shadows pulled her back. A crushing weight that had her gasping for breath. She could feel the icy grip of despair creeping back, trying to claw at her mind. "Don't give in!" she shouted, clenching her fists, drawing on every ounce of strength she had. But the shadows had other plans. They writhed and twisted, seeping into her mind, crawling under her skin, whispering the tales of the lost. She could hear their voices mingling with the rustling darkness, dreadful murmurs promising an eternity in silence. Suddenly, a surge of light erupted from her fingertips, a brilliant flash fueled by pure will. It sliced through the heavy murk, momentarily dispersing the tendrils that suffocated her. Jenkins recoiled, surprise flickering across his grotesque features. But she had no time to celebrate. The moment was fleeting. "Sarah, please!" the boy cried, his voice trembling like a suppressed scream. She turned her head, her heart splitting in two at the sight of him. He was chained, his eyes wide with fear, his small form shaking as he struggled against the binds that held him captive. "Hold on!" she screamed back, determination roaring through her veins. She reached for him, but the shadows surged again, drawing her closer to Jenkins. Such power, he bellowed, his eyes blazing with manic excitement. But it will burn out, just like all the others. No, Sarah shouted, her body trembling not just with fear, but with a flickering hope. I will not let you take him. In an act of sheer will, she steeled herself. She drew in a sharp breath, focusing on the boy, allowing his innocent face to fuel the fire within her. The shadows recoiled slightly at her fierce resolve, and for just a moment, Jenkins faltered. "Stay back!" she cried, thrusting her hand forward. Light blazed brighter, flickering against the deep darkness, illuminating the grotesque figure of Jenkins, casting monstrous silhouettes on the cold, hard ground. His laughter turned to a low snarl as the shadows began to retreat. But then Jenkins howled, rage spilling into the air as he unleashed a fierce wave of darkness. The shadows rushed in like a tempest, enveloping her once more, turning the light into a fragile flicker. Panic clawed at her chest. She had to move quickly. She didn't have much time. "Sarah!" The boy's voice broke through the storm, pleading. "I'm scared." "I'm coming," she promised, the words slipping out between clenched teeth. Drawing upon every ounce of fierceness inside her, Sarah began to channel the light again. She fought against the shadows, pushing back against Jenkins's control. The struggle was unlike anything she had ever faced, fear crackling along her skin, desperation mingling with hope. "Leave her," she shouted, her own voice tremulous but strong. There was a shift in the shadows, a momentary vacillation, the energy swirling between them, anxious and raw. Jenkins's eyes widened, reflecting fury and disbelief. "You cannot win," he hissed, yet the slightest tremor in his voice made her heart race with renewed determination. Through the chaos, a staggering thought pierced her mind. If she could tap into the shadows, manipulate them instead of fighting against them, would she be able to break the cycle? Just as she resolved to stretch her consciousness deeper into the darkness, an unexpected tremor beneath her feet startled her. The ground quaked, sending ripples through the air as Jenkins roared in defiance. The shadows began to swirl violently, threatening to consume them both. What was happening? The sanctuary was shifting, morphing before her eyes. With the walls of despair closing in around her, she had one last opportunity to either save the boy or lose everything. Would she find a way to bend the shadows to her will? Or would she succumb to the despair and join the lost souls forever trapped in Jenkins's twisted realm? As the ground beneath her continued to quake violently, Sarah's next move would be critical. Would she embrace the darkness or fight it to save not just her future, but the future of the boy lost behind the chains? The final answer hung in suspense, teetering on the brink of oblivion. The ground bucked violently, sending Sarah stumbling. Panic surged through her veins as she fought to maintain her balance. Jenkins's form flickered like a puppet in a storm, his eyes gleaming with malice. The darkness twisted and wriggled like a living beast, clawing at her mind, threatening to pull her under once more. "Focus," she told herself. "Use it." Glimmering light erupted from her palms, radiating warmth that pushed back the encroaching shadows. She thrust her hands forward, directing the light at the swirling darkness. With a shriek that pierced the air, Jenkins staggered back, his laughter morphing into a furious growl. "Pathetic!" he spat, his voice dripping with disdain. "You think you can outshine the abyss?" But a frantic hope flickered within her. She could feel the boy's fear, a beacon pulling her towards him. "Stay with me," she shouted. "I'm almost there." "Sarah!" His voice broke, filled with terror. "Please, hurry!" The shadows twisted aggressively, an elemental chaos raging against her light. She heard them whispering promises of despair, thick with temptation. If she lost herself in their depths, she could become powerful, unstoppable. But what was power without her humanity? "No!" she screamed, forcing her focus back to the boy. With gritted teeth, she pulled the light deeper, letting it engulf her, feeling the surge of energy pulsating through her being. Suddenly, a hunger seized the darkness, as if it sensed her resolve. It lashed out, surrounding her like a pack of wolves eager to devour. Sarah felt cold tendrils wrap around her limbs, constricting painfully. Each heartbeat echoed in her ears, mixing with Jenkins's mocking laughter. "Embrace it, Sarah," he taunted. "You know you want to join the others." Images flashed through her mind, the faces of those lost before, each one a reminder of failure, each one a nail in the coffin of her hope. A scream bubbled up from her chest, but was swallowed by the encroaching silence. One last time she summoned the light. This time she didn't just push it away. She let it flood every crevice, feeding off her despair, twisting the shadows to her will. "You are mine!" she declared. A burst of light exploded outward, stunning Jenkins, illuminating the darkness like a supernova. The shadows recoiled but didn't disappear. They clawed at her, shrieking. White heat pressed against her skin, and for one glorious moment she felt invincible. But as quickly as it came, the energy flickered. Jenkins shrieked in anger, shoving his claws deep into the ground. The sanctuary trembled violently, and with a ripping sound, the very fabric of this unholy realm began to rend into halves. "Fool!" he roared. "You cannot change destiny!" The ground beneath Sarah disintegrated, opening wide like a gaping maw. She was losing her grip, her light dimming, as shadows reached hungrily for her. She fought against it, but despair flooded in, threatening to drown her in darkness. "Sarah!" the boy cried again, his voice an echoing whip across the vast nothingness. She glimpsed him through the chaos, chains tightening around his small form as he disappeared into the shadows. "No!" she screamed, desperation exploding within her. With one last effort, Sarah leaped forward, plunging herself into the void, the light pulsating wildly as she chased after him. In that split second, a terrifying realization flooded her mind. Would she find him before the abyss consumed them both? Or would their struggle against the darkness end here, leaving them both bound in endless torment? The shadows surged, threatening to pull her down into the depths, as the very essence of despair tugged at her soul. What awaited her in the darkness? The darkness enveloped her like a thick fog, stifling and tangible. Each step into the void was weighed with dread, the very essence of despair clutching at her heart. With every pulse of light she managed to conjure, it felt like wrestling with a monstrous weight, pressing down on her spirit. The boy's distant cries echoed, a haunting melody of fear that pulled at her determination. "Stay with me!" she yelled, the sound swallowed by the shadows, but she pushed on as if her voice could reach him. "I'm coming!" The landscape shifted around her. One moment she was in a desolate abyss, and the next she found herself standing in a twisted version of the sanctuary they had fought to defend. The skies churned a sickly green, and the air crackled with tension. The ground below was littered with remnants of past battles, crimson stains marking the spots where others had succumbed to despair. Behind her, the cacophony of Jenkins's laughter filled the air, oily and suffocating. "Run while you can, girl," he roared, each syllable dripping with amusement. "You're already too late." Sarah's breath hitched. It was that taunting statement that ignited a fire within her. She could not, would not, give in to his despair. Desperation fueled her resolve as the boy's anguished shouts pierced through the haze like jagged glass. Finally harnessing the flickering light within her, she spread her arms wide. Waves of warmth radiated outward, sending ripples through the suffocating blackness. "I won't let you take him!" she shouted, surging toward the source of the cries. But with every step forward, Jenkins clawed at her mind, planting fears that burrowed deep. "You'll fail like the rest. You're no hero, just another lost soul." Those words sliced through her courage, but she countered with a ferocity she didn't know she possessed. "I'm not afraid of you," she roared, the syllables roaring defiantly. A shimmering flash of light erupted from her hands, battling against the relentless shadows. They writhed and recoiled, screeching as her brilliance penetrated their domain. Yet the moment of triumph was short-lived. They lashed back with a ferocity that rattled her bones, a collective howl of rage. As she pushed ahead, the boy's figure flickered into view, his small form shackled by chains that shimmered ominously in the gloom. Agony coursed through her as she dashed towards him, fighting against the weight of dread that threatened to smother her entire being. "Hold on," she cried. "Sarah," he sobbed, tears streaming down his cheeks. "They won't let you save me." The shadows enfolded him, shimmering with malevolence, their whispers growing louder and more insistent. Yet there was clarity in the horror. She realized now she wasn't just fighting for him, she was battling for her own very soul. Just as she reached him, Jenkins appeared, a shadow amidst shadows, smirking and gliding effortlessly like smoke. "You thought you could change fate?" he hissed, summoning tendrils of darkness that coiled around her, choking the light. Sarah hesitated, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. Could they escape together, or was she sealing both their fates with her reckless bravery? With a sudden burst of determination, she focused all her energy into one blazing surge of light. "We will break free!" she declared. But Jenkins laughed, a sound filled with cold amusement. "You truly believe you can escape the inevitable?" In that moment, the ground trembled beneath her, the air thick with the electric charge of despair. Would her light be enough? As the shadows clawed at her once more, she realized the reality of what was at stake. Either they fought together or succumbed to the dark. One last gamble against fate. With the shadows closing in, and the boy's terrified voice echoing around her, Sarah's last thread of hope was hanging by a fraying string. What awaited them in this relentless battle against the darkness? And before she knew it, the world faded into chaotic whispers. Chaos swallowed her, the whispers becoming a terrifying chant that surged like a storm. Sarah struggled to draw light from within, but darkness clawed at her throat, suffocating her spirit. Every breath felt sharper, the very atmosphere a web of anguish. Jenkins's laughter echoed, a sound that felt like razors against her skin, leaving a trail of dread behind. "Sarah, please!" The boy's voice, small and filled with desperation, cut through the tumult for just an instant. She reached out, desperate fingers grasping for his chains, but they shimmered just out of reach. The shadows shrieked, twisting, circling like vultures above prey, determined to strip away her hope. "You can't save him," Jenkins taunted, each word a dagger aimed straight at her heart. "You're trapped in a dream, a wretched illusion. He belongs to me now." Sarah squeezed her eyes shut against the tormenting sight, focusing on the warmth inside her, the flicker of courage that ignited in her core. It felt like a flame flickering in a storm. She pictured the boy's face, the innocence in his eyes, and though Jenkins clawed at her thoughts, she whispered, "No." With a primal scream, she released all her determination. Blinding light erupted from her, illuminating the suffocating shadows. They lunged, a tide of darkness seeking to extinguish her light, but she would not allow it. The ground cracked beneath her feet as light collided with darkness, the energy vibrating like a wild animal. "Stop!" Jenkins shouted, struggling against the light. His form flickered, unstable, as though her illumination was disintegrating his essence. But she wouldn't hesitate. "You do not control this," she cried, the words echoing around them, a battle cry that resonated through the very air. For a moment, darkness drew back. The chains binding the boy shone weakly under the glow. But then the shadows surged again, a flawless wave swallowing the light, shrouding her hopes in relentless despair. Something pulled at her from the depths, probing into her vulnerabilities, targeting her fear, and she felt it, a crack in her resolve. "Let him go," she begged, tears streaking down her cheeks. "You can't have him." The words hung in the air, a fragile thread in a fierce gale. "Can't I?" Jenkins's voice slithered around her, taunting. "He's afraid, Sarah. You think fearless light can conquer fear itself? You're nothing but a flicker, and a flicker can easily be blown out." The ground quaked again, and Sarah lost her footing, tumbling into the abyss of shadows. The boy's cries transformed into a cacophony of despair, drowning her senses. She clawed at the air, panic rising like bile in her throat. Remember, she warned herself, she had fought countless battles before. This one could not end in defeat. Gathering herself, she pulled from the depths of her core and summoned the luminous energy, breathing light into every crevice of darkness. The shadows writhed, shrieking in unison. "No, you cannot!" Jenkins screamed, his form distorting, twisting. "It's too late for you!" Sarah roared. With every ounce of strength, her light surged forward, but instead of freedom, it collided with something more profound, a vast darkness that shrank back and then pulsated around her, a heart of shadows revealing the most chilling truth. "Welcome to the end," Jenkins whispered, his voice now smooth and silken, laden with malice. Suddenly the shadows parted to reveal more than just darkness. Glimpses of her past flashed within, moments of failure, of fear, and her deepest regrets. Faces of the lost filled her vision. Friends, family, their voices echoing accusations. "Why didn't you save them?" Jenkins taunted, feeding on her anguish. "They trusted you, just like he does, but you're not a savior, are you?" With each haunting memory, Sarah felt the suffocating grip of despair wrap tighter around her. Would she succumb to the darkness, just like so many before her? Or could she rise, driven by the light remaining within her? The ground beneath her rippled and shook, her light threatened to flicker again. Then a thought pierced through the growing gloom. What if Jenkins was the one who feared? What if all this time it was him who was trapped? Determination flooded through her once more, a flood of warmth. She would not let the shadows define her. With a fierce shout, she pushed against the memories, against the creeping darkness, throwing her energy into one final burst. "No!" Jenkins shrieked, voice laced with terror. The shadows around them wavered and trembled, and just as the light began to engulf everything, a scream resonated, chilling her bones. A desperate promise was shouted from the depths. "You will never escape!" The world around her began to crack, fractures appearing in the fabric of the shadows, as everything else faded away into spectral silence, leaving her alone. Alone with the truth hanging in the air, clawing its way to freedom. What was the truth she had yet to uncover? What horrors lay ahead as she ventured deeper into this forsaken realm? Sarah gasped as the world solidified around her, her breath snatched by the stillness. It felt like waking from a nightmare into another nightmare. The shadows receded, but only slightly, as if they were simply waiting for the right moment to strike again. Her surroundings transformed into a dimly lit corridor, cold brick walls, slick with moisture. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of mildew and decay, and an unseen weight pressed on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She stood alone, panic surging again as her thoughts spiraled. There was no sound, except the whisper of her own heartbeat, pounding relentlessly in her ears. Had Jenkins truly been vanquished, or merely forced to retreat? The uncertainty gnawed at her. "Hello?" she called out, her own voice echoing off the walls, the sound swallowed by the oppressive silence. The warm glow of her earlier light flickered cautiously, casting weak shadows that danced ominously on the bricks. She clutched her hands together, eyes darting down the passage, drenched in shadows. As she moved forward, cautious steps drumming in time with her frantic heart, flickering memories taunted her. Friends, family, those she had lost, their faces illuminated in patches of light. Voices echoed, anguish-filled whispers that grew louder, surrounding her. "Why didn't you save them?" the chorus chanted, digging into her, opening old wounds. "Shut up! I'm not afraid of you!" she shouted, trying to overpower the haunting voices, but her defiance merely sparked a low, sinister laughter that rippled through the corridor. The walls began to pulse, and Sarah stumbled back, horrified. It was as though the space itself was alive, feeding off her fear. From the shadows, figures lurked, faces half-formed and twisted, eyes glinting with malice. She could see them gliding toward her, silence replaced by the scraping of invisible feet on stone. Desperation bubbled within her. She surged forward, light outstretched before her like a shield. With it, she chased away the creeping shadows momentarily, feeling a swell of strength surge in her core. But before she could breathe a sigh of relief, a cold breeze swept through, snuffing her precious glow, her sanctuary. "Is this what you need?" Jenkins's voice slithered into her ear, sweet yet dripping with venom. "You cling to your precious light, but it makes you easy to find. You think you know fear. Let me show you true terror." The shadows enveloped her once more, thick and suffocating. Panic clawed at the edges of her mind, but she couldn't let the darkness consume her. She raced through the corridor, pounding on walls, desperate for an exit, but they closed in around her, an unforgiving maze. And then she saw it, a door at the end. Flickering light illuminated the edges, drawing her in with a siren's call. With every ounce of strength she sprinted, hope flooding her veins. Oblivion howled behind her, Jenkins' laughter a storm crashing down at her back, growing louder, closer. Just as she reached for the doorknob, icy fingers brushed against her skin, and a scream bubbled up her throat. She twisted, only to find herself staring into a pair of shimmering, empty eyes, forever reaching, forever hungry, clawing for her life. "Welcome home, Sarah." The door shuddered violently, the very ground beneath her quaking as Jenkins's power surged, defeating her resolve. For a moment, she felt like she was standing on the precipice of oblivion, and in those last seconds, one thought stabbed through her clarity. Was this truly the end? The threshold behind her glowed brighter, stronger, as the air crackled with energy. In that moment all was silence, and Sarah was left with one terrifying question. What awaited her beyond the door? What truths would she have to confront to truly escape? She gripped the handle tightly, breathing deep, and with a defiant roar, turned it, ready to face whatever lay beyond. The door swung open with a deafening creak, revealing a blinding light that engulfed Sarah, pushing against the shadows like a tidal wave. For a moment, she felt suspended between light and darkness, her heart pounding as if trying to escape her chest. Would she step into salvation or be dragged back into the void? As she crossed the threshold, the bright light washed over her, illuminating the corridor behind her like a long-forgotten memory. Shadows writhed and twisted in silent anguish, Jenkins's voice fading into the distance, his laughter drowned beneath the brightness. "Sarah?" The boy stood before her, trembling but alive, the chains that bound him dissolving into the air. Relief flooded over her, bitter-sweet and overpowering. Memories fell away like dead leaves. All that mattered was right here, right now. "I'm here!" she exclaimed, rushing toward him. She swept him into her arms, cradling him tightly as sobs of relief escaped her. His small frame shook in her embrace, and she could feel his heart racing against her chest. "Are we safe?" he whispered, his voice cracking, still trembling from the darkness. Safe from him, she promised, knowing the fight might not be over. The sanctuary felt like it could still cry out for them, but this moment was theirs, a brief reprieve in a world that had turned ugly. With their hands clasped tightly together, they stepped into the light. It burst around them like a fireworks display, vibrant and electric. Peace washed over them, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence of the basement underneath. But just as they moved forward, a shadow flickered at the edge of the light. Sarah's heart dropped. She stiffened, pulling the boy closer, dreading the return of the darkness. Jenkins's menacing presence loomed, and she felt it creeping back, clawing at the edges of her mind once again. A low growl reverberated through the air. "You think you can escape? You're tethered to me now." "No," Sarah shouted defiantly into the light. Her voice found strength, echoing with the truth she had discovered. Darkness could not dictate her life. She was more than the shadow it bred. With fierce determination, she focused on the warmth within her, the light that emanated from her heart, pulsating with each breath. "I will not let you take him." The shadows writhed, sporadic bursts of Jenkins's anger lashing out, swirling like a storm around them. But Sarah ignited more light, letting it fill the space, blending with the boy's presence. Together, they were a force. "Let's go," she urged him, dragging him toward the shimmering exit before them. As they dashed forward, the ground trembled, cracks forming under the relentless pressure of Jenkins's wrath. She would not let fear trample over hope. In one swift motion, she pushed them through the final barrier. The world exploded into pure brilliance, the shadows disintegrating in an overwhelming pulse of light. A sharp crack resonated behind them, a final scream of despair echoing in the emptiness. And then there was silence. Sarah found herself sprawled on soft grass, under a sky painted in dazzling hues of sunset, the fragrant scent of wildflowers dancing around her. She looked down to see the boy beside her, blinking up at the sky in awe. "Did we win?" he asked, a touch of innocence threading through his voice, as if unsure of their new reality. "Yes," she breathed, wiping a tear from her cheek. "We're free." They shared a moment of silence, the beauty of freedom settling in as the remnants of their torment faded into memory. The darkness was behind them, a shadow of a past they had conquered together. As Sarah stood, gathering the boy in her arms, she felt the warmth of motherhood radiate in her chest. There was pain in her heart. It would always remain, reminders of the scars left behind. But there was also hope, a chance for a fresh start. "Let's go home," she whispered, and together they ventured into the bright unknown, hand in hand. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the shadows vanished completely, and the horrors of Jenkins's sanctuary melted away like the remnants of fear. In that moment, Sarah knew they could rebuild, create a new story, free from the chains of their past. Embracing the hope of tomorrow, she felt lighter, stronger. And while their journey had led them through darkness, it also guided them towards something more beautiful, light that would help them find their way home. Now is the time to embrace your own story. Subscribe immediately to our channel so you don't miss the next thrilling adventure. Smash that like button now to help the algorithm send more stories your way. Flood the comments section with your reactions and theories about the ending. Your voice matters. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Your support drives us to create more unforgettable tales.